Hello, 7th and 8th. We are going to continue our chapter 22, Troubled Times for America, with reading a couple of chapters, well, the last chapter of Sadie and Bessie Delaney's book, Having Our Say. We've been reading this throughout the year, chapter by chapter of the textbook, fitting it in, because these are two women who actually witnessed history, lived through it, and then wrote about it for us. And we can be very thankful for them for doing that. So this is our last time we're going to be reading this, the end of this chapter. And if you guys, I know you don't have the book at home, so I have it for you on the slideshow. But you do need to have your reading guide out. We're on page 211 of your workbook. So go ahead and get that out. Turn to page 211 because you're going to be answering questions from the text. I'm going to read it to you. You're also going to have the text in front of you. So if at any time you need to go back and double check something or reread it, you can do that. You can just rewind on this video. So we are in the very last section called Outliving the Rebbe Boys. And the Rebbe Boys were the the white Southerners, specifically men, who just didn't want black people to get ahead. And that's what the Delaney sisters called them. So this is the last section. This first little bit is written by the woman who actually wrote their story down for them. And she adds a little context to what the next chapters are going to be about, remember? It says, the decades following the end of World War II were an era of new hope for Black Americans. Under pressure from Congressman Adam Clayton Powell Jr., and we remember him from the Harlem Renaissance, and A. Philip Randolph of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, President Harry Truman desegregated the armed forces in 1948. Several years later, with the Supreme Court's ruling on Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, desegregation of schools became the law of the land. Then, on December 1st, 1955, a department store tailor named Rosa Parks single-handedly assailed the Jim Crow laws by not giving up her seat to a white man on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Her protest sparked a revolution, spearheaded by the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., a decade of protests against racial discrimination at the voting booth and in schools, employment, and public accommodations. Television cameras rolled as white lawmen beat black protesters with clubs, dogs, and fire hoses. The demonstrators' slogan was, "The whole world is watching." And indeed, those images of violence would help secure passage of landmark civil rights legislation guaranteeing Black Americans their full constitutional prerogatives. But while the battle for integration was raging in the South, de facto segregation persisted in the North, often by subtle means that were hard to combat directly. Housing was one of the most visible arenas of struggle, as Black people were frequently barred from moving into white neighborhoods. White resistance ran especially high in the new suburbs that arose after World War II that offered a lifestyle that had begun to represent the American dream. And now the Delaneys, entering retirement and so sidelined during the years of civil rights demonstrations, joined the advance guard of a different integration movement. Bessie. Today, all of Mount Vernon, it seems, is mostly Negro. But in 1957, it was mostly white. I don't think either Sadie or I had ever lived among so many white folks before, and it was a bit of a shock to us. Of course, we were a bit of a shock to them. Hap had broken the neighborhood. He was the first colored person to move in there. They wouldn't let him buy a house. People blocked that. You know, the white real estate agents found excuses not to show him houses in certain neighborhoods, things like that. So, do you know what Hap did? He built a house. He just went and bought a piece of land right smack in the middle of the nicest white neighborhood, and before the neighbors could figure out what was happening, they were pouring the foundation. Hap had some trouble for a while after they moved in. More than once, some white folks cut the tires on his Cadillac. But what these folks didn't understand was that Hap was a Delaney, and the harder they tried to push him out, the more he dug in his heels. But his experience did not discourage Sadie and me from moving there. We figured, why shouldn't we live where we want to? The first time I answered the door at our Mount at our house in Mount Vernon, it was some white lady from the welcome wagon, and she went on and on about this and that, and then she said to me, and be sure you tell the owner. And I said, lady, I have news for you. I am the owner. Well, she about dropped dead. It was clear she thought it was the maid. You know, she was thinking, what's this little darky doing owning a big house like this? Or, Lord, this neighborhood is finished. It's doomed. The darkies have taken over. They'll bring all their friends. Once, when we were new to a neighborhood, a white policeman came knocking on the door. We were a little afraid. What did he want from us? Well, we went upstairs and opened the window and called down to him. That's what we do when we aren't sure about opening the door for someone. Sadie said to me, let me handle him. She leaned out the window and said, Officer, can I help you? And he called up, we're raising money for the auxiliary, and I'm selling tickets to a dance. And she giggled and she said, why, officer, thank you very much, but I'm too old to go to a dance. And she giggled some more and shut the window. Now, I just hate it when Sadie plays dumb like that. I told her, Sadie, that fellow must think you're the dumbest person alive. And she said, so what? I didn't make him angry, did I? And I've still got my money, don't I? It annoys me, but I have to admit she's right. Back when Negroes were starting to move into Mount Vernon, some of the white folks were mighty ornery. They would complain about such petty things like the way that Negro children would play in the street. Well, these children didn't know any better. They had come from the city, and that's how children play in the city. It was little things like that, little cultural differences that were the source of tension. There was one white family. I got to address that one paragraph here. When I was growing up, we all played in the street too. It's not a black or white thing. It was normal American suburb behavior to go and play in the street. We played all the time. Okay, there is only one white family left in our neighborhood now, and you know they recently had a terrible blow. Their son died tragically. He was about 20 years old. Now that family had always been suspicious of us colored folks. I brought them some vegetables from my garden a long time ago, and they made it clear they didn't want to be friends. They never thanked me or anything. They were pretty rude. Now, when that boy died, they were sure surprised at how the colored folks reacted on the block. We just went on over there quietly and brought food and flowers. One thing about Negroes, we know how to react in a tragedy. We know how to show support. Do you know what? That white family sent every one of us a thank you note. That surprised us. Some white folks believe that Negroes bring down a neighborhood because they don't keep up their property. Well, in our case, we had the neatest, spiffiest looking yard on the block. Sadie and I set out to have the best garden you could find, and it has given us a great deal of pleasure. For many years, these little white gals would walk over from this white retirement home just to look at it every day. Of course, we had lots of flowers, roses, you name it, but we also grew vegetables like Kentucky wonder beans, which we would eat or can for the winter months. I'll tell you a funny thing about what happened with our garden. A beautiful plant with a star-shaped leaf started growing there, and we couldn't figure out what it was. It annoyed us because we thought we knew everything about gardening, and we hadn't seen this plant before. It got bigger and bigger, and we covered it faithfully each winter. Whenever we had visitors to the house, do y'all know what that kind of plant is? And none of our visitors ever knew either. Finally, our young nephew said, Aunt Bessie, Aunt Sadie, what in the world do y'all do with a marijuana plant in your garden? Well, we were surprised. And I said, Sadie, we better get rid of it immediately because we're breaking the law. Don't worry, we got somebody to take care of it. Our biggest problem with that old house is that we did not have the money to furnish it. We didn't want to go into spending all our savings on furniture. We didn't know how long we would live, and we thought if we took after Mama and lasted a long time, we would need that hard-earned money in the banks. Hard-time money in the bank, yes, sir. So I'll tell you what we did. We started buying furniture from the Salvation Army. Now, we didn't mind having things secondhand. After all, we grew up wearing secondhand clothes that Mama bought us at a mission store. In those days, rich people give a lot of good furniture to the Salvation Army. Well, we learned real quick they would always quote Sadie a high price. So we worked out a plan. We would go in the store together and scout out any good furniture that had just gotten there. And then we'd leave kind of casually to discuss what we should buy. Then Sadie would go in and say, how much do you want for that? And they would give her a price like $15. Then I'd go in prepared and say, how much do you want for that old thing? And they'd say $15. And I'd say, what? $15 for the old piece of junk? And they'd say, well, $10. And I'd say, I'll give you $8. And the next thing you knew, we had a big old piece of mahogany furniture, just what we needed, for $8. We did this all the time until we had all the furniture we needed. Next to the Salvation Army was the day-old bread store. This became Sadie's job, to shop at the day-old bread store. She knew what was good and what was not just by looking at it. And honey, we saved a ton of money over the years shopping at that bread store. We ain't too proud to eat day-old bread. It was while we were shopping at the Salvation Army in the day-old bread store that we heard that President Kennedy had been shot. They had a radio on in the Salvation Army, and when I heard the news, I ran to the bread store and told Sadie they done killed him. And she said, "Killed who?" It was such a shock that someone would kill our young president like that. It made my heart bleed. Sadie and I believe it was the mafia who did it. See, I told you, there's lots of conspiracy theories. After that, it seemed like all the leaders were getting shot. Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy. Sadie and I were so distressed about it. I'm glad that Ted Kennedy didn't run for president because I think he'd have gotten himself killed too. Ted Kennedy has made some serious mistakes in his life, but Sadie and I decided he must be a nice boy because we heard on the radio he visits his mother all the time in Massachusetts. And Sadie says, if he's nice to his mama, then he's okay by me. He wasn't a nice guy. Ted Kennedy actually didn't run for president because they knew there was no way he'd be able to live down an issue that he had in his past where he was at a party, offered to give a young woman a ride. He was already married. There was some speculation that this is a woman he was dating at the time while he was married. They were both drunk after they left the party, or when they left the party, and he drove his car off a bridge and landed in Chappaquiddick. That's a river. And he got out of the car immediately and swam to shore, went home, slept, got up the next morning, and then called the authorities and told them that there was a young lady in the car. He never attempted even to rescue her. So he would never, ever live that down. He served as a senator for most of his life because the people in his state really were fond of the Kennedys. And so he was able to serve because of that name. And he did make some serious heteros, or he worked very hard in the Senate. I'm not putting that down, but he would never live past this part of his life. He would never become president because of this issue. And so when people say he must have been a nice boy because he visited his mom, there's some issues there with people who will not forget Chappaquiddick. Okay, it's interesting the way folks have become interested in Malcolm X again. At the time that this was written, the Malcolm X autobiography was being taught in almost every high school, and Spike Lee had made a movie about the autobiography of Malcolm X. I used to be a really big Spike Lee fan, and I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, and I was really excited that Spike Lee was making it into a movie, and I was so disappointed and really angry that Spike Lee purposely put some really foul language in the movie, because that was Spike Lee's motive, modus operandi. That's what he does. He uses a lot of really foul language as a part of a shock value. And one of the reason that really bothered me was because in his autobiography, Malcolm X specifically states that he hates foul language. And so the fact that Spike Lee would do that, it just went against it just really bothered me, because it went against the whole grain of the autobiography, which is really worth reading. It's a good book. It's written the way... It's interesting the way folks have become interested in Malcolm X again. A lot of the things he said were true, but he said them so bluntly that white folks were scared to death of him. It was easier for white folks to admire Martin Luther King because he was less threatening to them. As far as Sadie and I are concerned, Martin Luther King was an angel. He just dropped from heaven, and there hasn't been anyone as special since then. Now, I know that Martin Luther King was not perfect. There are all these stories coming out about him now. They may not be true at all. And if they are, well, I never expected him to be perfect. He was a man after all. I don't expect him to be Jesus Christ. One of the biggest regrets of my life was that Sadie and I didn't go to Washington for the big march in the summer of 1963. I would have loved to have heard Martin Luther King give his I Have a Dream speech. We were already old ladies at the time, in our 70s, and some younger relatives talked us out of going. They thought we'd be overwhelmed in the crowds. It's a good thing we didn't go because the woman we had planned to go with did a silly thing. She was so determined to get near Martin Luther King that she got up as close as she could and then pretended to faint. They carried her over to the VIP tent, which is what she had in mind, I guess. Well, if Sadie and I had been separated from her, who knows what could have happened. We might have had trouble getting back to New York. We had a lot of younger relatives involved in the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s. We had one nephew who went to Selma. There's the footnote there. It says the city of Selma, Alabama was the site of a key series of civil rights demonstrations. In March 1965, during a fiercely opposed drive to register black voters, Martin Luther King Jr. led a protest march from Selma to the state capital, Montgomery, which was marked by brutal bludgeonings of civil rights demonstrators. We had one nephew who went down to Selma, and we were just worried to death. We saw all that action on the TV where they were turning fire hoses on those poor colored folks, and honey, it was mighty discouraging. The civil rights movement was a time when we thought, maybe now it will finally happen. Maybe now our country will finally grow up and come to terms with this race mess. But it seems like the momentum was lost when the Vietnam War happened. It was like all the energy of the young people and the focus of the country got shifted away from civil rights. Sadie and I were very upset by the whole Vietnam mess. We had a great nephew in Vietnam who was not the same after he came home. His life just went down the drain. Vietnam just seemed like one big mistake. Politicians are not like normal people. They don't say, sorry, I made a mistake. They don't know how to admit when they're wrong and fix the situation. But it wasn't just Vietnam that slowed down the progress we made in the civil rights movement, in my opinion. It had a lot to do with the lack of leadership after Martin Luther King died. Things have kind of slid downhill as far as equality is concerned. The 1980s were the worst, yes, sir. Sadie and I are registered independents, and we usually favor the Democrats, like Mr. Clinton. We loved Jimmy Carter because he was an honest man and his heart was in the right place. And another president we liked was Lyndon Johnson because we believe he sincerely tried to help our people with his war on poverty. And I liked Harry Truman. I surely like that buck stops here business. I'll tell you something, honey. I would have made a very good president. That's right, me. I would have done well. I'm honest and I'm tough and I could get the job done. Yes, sir. The first thing I would do if I was president was be to say that people over 100 years of age no longer have to pay taxes. Ha ha! Lord knows I paid my share. Seriously, the first thing I would do if I was president was to get rid of the old deficit. That funny little white guy, Ross Perot, he's right about the deficit. He had run against Bush and Clinton. And he was a businessman who wanted to get rid of the deficit. We are foolish, foolish people. The deficit is a disgrace. I heard on the radio that every 2 seconds our debt increases $1 million. When I heard that, it got me so upset I could not sleep that night. It just about worried me to death. Guess it would be about 1,000 years, probably never, before a colored person is elected president of the United States. Sadie disagrees with me. She says, there will be a Negro president someday. This reminds me of a song that white minstrels in the blackface would sing to make fun of Negroes back in the 1890s. The reason this song was written in the 1890s was this was a time when a lot of black politicians were being voted in because people in the South hadn't been allowed to vote if they had fought or were officers in the Civil War. And so it was like it was right after the Reconstruction era. So it says, oh, what fun in Washington. I'll bet you every, and I'm not going to use the word because it's used as a pejorative against black people. I'll bet you every person from Prison Town will be there. Oh, what fun in Washington when that person sits in the presidential chair. The idea that a black man could become president. Because a lot of black people were being elected because of Republican influence in the South. And Democrats weren't allowed to vote during the time of Reconstruction if they were part of the Confederate officers. She continues on and says, see, I think white people would rather die than vote for a Negro president. We know that's not true. I predict there will be a white woman president before there's a Negro president. And if a Negro is elected president, that person will be a Negro woman. How do I know this? I'm a little psychic. She was wrong, though. Like with that Clarence Thomas mess, the Supreme Court nomination, he's lying. That girl, Anita Hill, is telling the truth. And Sadie says, how do you know? Well, I'll tell you something, honey. I know a rascal and I see one. Clarence Thomas is still in the Supreme Court, and that was a huge mess in the 90s when he was accused. He was being offered the job of Supreme Court Justice, and a woman he had worked with in the past came forward and said that he was sexually harassing her the whole time that she worked for him. It went to this big time in the Senate when the Senate was kind of judging whether or not he should be allowed to be a Supreme Court justice. And this woman gave testimony, and it was all over the news. It was really huge. And it was decided that he didn't do it by the Senate and that he was allowed to become a Supreme Court justice. Anita Hill still says that it happened. He says it didn't happen. It's a he said, she said. The interesting thing is that the very next president was going to be taken to court for the exact same issue. And he's actually going to be found that he did lie about the fact that he sexually harassed women who worked for him. So Bessie is wrong on a couple accounts here. She preferred Clinton. She didn't like Clarence Thomas, and yet they were both accused of doing the exact same thing, and Clinton was actually found guilty. And then the idea that white people would rather die than vote for a Negro president. When Barack Obama was elected, most white people in the United States wanted to see him succeed because we liked the idea of having a black president. We did not like his policies if we were conservative. I'm a conservative overall, so I had a hard time with some of his socialistic policies, but I also had a hard time voting for his opponent because the Republican candidate for president was just as socialistic as Barack Obama was, and that was John McCain. So I said it many times while the two were running against each other. They're two sides of the same coin. They believe basically the same thing. Technically, I mean, honestly, when it comes to just what they believed and what they were pushing, McCain could have been the running mate for Barack Obama. They were so similar in what they believed. We really didn't have a chance. It was going to be a socialist either way. So, but when the election was done, the majority of people in the United States said, okay, it wasn't the person if it was a person who didn't vote for Barack Obama, they said, okay, we didn't vote for him, but we still want him to succeed because we want our presidents to succeed, no matter who they are, because if the president succeeds, then the country succeeds. But it was the socialistic policies that he continued to push that really made him unpopular, especially during his second term. It's unfortunate. Let's see. She's talking again about the Supreme Court nomination. Sadie and I watched the whole thing on TV because it was televised. And when I saw all those silly old white men asking those stupid questions, I almost got myself on a train and went down to Washington. I could have straightened out that whole Clarence Thomas mess in 10 minutes. Yes, sir. I should have gotten myself on a train and gone on down there, but Sadie wouldn't let me. You see that I still have the urge to change the world. The truth is, you're born a certain way, and there's some things you can't change, and some things you can change, and some things you can't. Okay, going on to Sadie. One thing I've noticed since I got this old is that I have started to dream in color. I remember that someone was wearing a red dress or a pink sweater, something like that. I'll also dream more than I used to, and when I wake up, I feel tired. I say to Bessie, I sure am tired this morning. I was teaching all night in my dreams. Been there. Bessie was always the big dreamer. She was always talking about what she dreamed the night before. She has the same dream over and over about a party she went to on Cotton Street in Raleigh way back when. Nothing special happened. She just keeps dreaming she's there. In our dreams, we are always young. The truth is, we both forget we're old. This happens all the time. I'll reach for something real quick, just like a young person, and realize my reflexes are not what they once were. It surprises me, but I can't complain. I still do what I want, pretty much. These days, I'm usually the first one awake in the mornings. I wake up at 6:30. The first thing I do when I open my eyes is smile, and then I say, thank you, Lord, for another day. If I don't hear Bessie get up, I go to her room and wake her up. Sometimes I have to knock on her headboard, and she opens her eyes and says, oh, Lord, another day. I don't think Bessie would get up at all sometimes if it weren't for me. She stays up late in her room and listens to those talk radio shows, and she doesn't get enough sleep. In the mornings, Monday through Friday, we do our yoga exercises. I started doing yoga exercises with Mama about 40 years ago. Mama was starting to shrink up and get bent down, and I started exercising with her to straighten her back up again. Only I didn't know at the time that what we were doing is actually yoga. We just thought we were exercising. I kept doing my yoga exercises even after Mama died. Well, when Bessie turned 80, she decided that I looked better than her, so she decided she would start doing yoga, too. So we've been doing exercises together ever since. We follow a yoga exercise program on the TV. Sometimes Bessie cheats. I'll be doing an exercise and look over at her and she's just lying there. She's a naughty old girl. Exercise is very important. A lot of older people don't exercise at all. Another thing that is terribly important is diet. I keep up with the latest news about nutrition. About 30 years ago, Bessie and I started eating much more healthy foods. We don't eat that fatty southern food very often. When we do, we feel like we can't move. We eat as many as 7 different vegetables a day, plus lots of fresh fruits. And we take vitamin supplements. Vitamins A, B complex, C, D, E, and minerals too, like zinc. And Bexy takes tyrosine when she's a little blue. Every morning after we do yoga, we each take a clove of garlic, chop it up, and swallow it whole. If you swallow it all at once, there's no odor. We also take a teaspoon of cod liver oil. Bessie thinks it's disgusting, but one day I said, "Now, dear little sister, if you want to keep up with me, you're going to have to start taking it every day and stop complaining." And she's been good ever since. As soon as we moved to our house in 1957, we began boiling the tap water we use for our drinking water. Folks keep telling us it's not necessary that the city of Mount Vernon purifies the water, but it's a habit, and at our age, child, we're not about to change our routine. These days, I do most of the cooking, and Bessie does the serving. We eat our big meal the day at noon. In the evening, we shall have a milkshake for dinner, and then we go upstairs and watch McNeil Lair on the TV. After that, we say our prayers. We say prayers in the morning and before we go to bed. It takes a long time to pray for everyone because it's a big family. We have 15 nieces and nephews still living, plus all their children and grandchildren. We pray for each one, living and dead. The ones that Bessie doesn't approve of get extra prayers. Bessie can be very critical, and she holds things against people forever. I always have to say to her, "Everybody has to be themselves, Bessie. Live and let live." Bessie can be very kind, although she usually saves that kind side for children and animals. She has a little dog who belonged to someone in the neighborhood who didn't want him anymore. He's part Chihuahua and I don't know what else, and he has some nasty habits, but Bessie loves him. She never eats a meal without saving the best piece for her little dog. I'll tell you a story. Not long ago, the Episcopal Bishop of New York had a dinner to honor me and Bessie. A couple of days beforehand, Bessie announced she was going to bring a doggy bag to the dinner. I said, "What? Why, Bess? People will think you're a peculiar old woman." And she said, "So what? Maybe I am a peculiar old woman. I hear they're having prime rib, and I would die of guilt if I had prime rib and didn't save any for my little dog." Sure enough, when they served the dinner, Bessie took the bag out of her pocketbook and started to cut off the nicest part of the meat. And the bishop, who was sitting right there, asked her what she was doing. The next thing I knew, the bishop was cutting off a piece of his prime rib and wrapping it in a napkin for Bessie's little dog, and everybody else started doing the same thing because the bishop did. When we got home, Bessie was so excited she was almost giddy. She kept saying, "I've got enough prime rib to feed my little dog for a week." And I said, "Well, I certainly hope he enjoys the bishop's dinner." Before Bessie got her little dog, we had a stray cat we named Mr. Delaney, because since we didn't have a man in the house. He had been run over by a car and had crawled up on our doorstep. So we brought the kitty in the house, rubbed salve into his cuts, and splinted him up. We fed him by hand and fussed over him day and night for 2 weeks. And you know what? He was just fine. But one day he ran off. Bessie's still grieving for that old cat. She says, "I know he must be dead, or he would have come back." If only I could get Bessie to be as sweet to people as she is to her animals. Bessie can get a little nasty sometimes, you know. She thinks it's her God-given duty to tell people the truth. I say to her, "Bessie, don't you realize people don't want to hear the truth?" One time there's a woman in our neighborhood who was furious at her granddaughter for moving in with her boyfriend. This woman was running around the neighborhood complaining to anyone who would listen. I sort of sympathetic, but Bessie said to her, "You shouldn't be running all around bad-mouthing your own kin." Of course, Bessie was right, but that poor lady was embarrassed and has avoided us ever since. Another time, a priest was over here visiting us, and I noticed he put on a little weight. I thought to myself, uh-oh, I bet she says something to him. Well, when he was leaving, Bessie said, "Now, Father, it seems to me you're getting fat. You got to lose some weight." He laughed and said yes, he knew he needed to go on a diet. When he left, I said to Bessie, "What did you have to go and say that for?" And she said, I care about people's health, and sometimes people need somebody to give it to them straight." Bessie does not mince words, and when she has a strong opinion, especially when it involves me, she is not shy. Not long ago, one of our nieces died, and somebody was over here describing the place where she died. It was called a hospice, and it sounded awfully nice. I said, "Well, maybe when my time comes, y'all should take me to a hospice." But Bessie got real mad. She said, "You ain't dying in no hospice. You ain't dying nowhere but upstairs in your bed." Over the years, we've buried a lot of people. Even the generation younger than us is starting to die off. I don't know why I'm still here and they're not, but I don't fret over it. It's in God's hands. You know, when you're this old, you don't know if you're going to wake up in the morning, but I don't worry about dying, and neither does Bessie. We are at peace. You do kind of wonder, when's it going to happen? That's why you learn to love each and every day, child. Truth is, I've gotten so old I'm starting to get a little bold. Not long ago, some young men started hanging out in front of our house. They were part of a gang from the Bronx, and they just thought our dead-end street here was a good spot to play basketball and do drugs, and I don't know what all. Well, Bessie says to me, "I'll go out there and get rid of them." And I said, "No, Bess, for once, I'm going to handle it. You stay in the house." I went out the back door and around the sidewalk where they were hanging out, and I said, "You boys better get out of here." They were kind of surprised, and one of them said, "You can't make us leave. This is a public street." I said, "Yes, it is a public street, but it's not a park, so get moving." And this fellow said to me, "Just how do you think you're going to make us go?" I pointed to my house and said, "My sister is inside and she has her hand on the phone to call the police." Of course, this was a little white lie because we don't have a phone, but they didn't know that. So the leader of this group laughed at me and said, "You think the police are going to come when some old woman calls them?" And I said, "Yes, they will come because I own this property here and I own this house and I pay my taxes. They will come and they will boot you out of here." Well, they grumbled and complained, and finally they left. They came back about a week later, and our neighbor ran them off, and they never did come back. Bessie was kind of surprised that I took on those boys like that. To tell you the truth, so was I. Okay, this is our last chapter, so we're just going to power through and finish it up. I was mighty proud of Sadie for taking on those no-good fellas and running them on out of here. It just goes to show she can be tough when she puts her mind to it. I said to her, "Sadie, our grandpa Milliam surely would have been proud." I was just thinking about Mr. Milliam this morning. There's a cute little squirrel in my yard, and I said, "Oh, you better be glad Mr. Milliam and his gun ain't around, 'cause he'd shoot you and fry you up for his breakfast." You know how when you come up on a squirrel, it'll run around to the other side of the tree? Where Mr. Milliam would send one of us grandchildren to chase the squirrel back around to his side, and he would shoot it dead while the child stayed behind the tree. But don't worry, Mr. Milliam was an excellent shot, and nobody ever got hurt. I wonder what Mr. Milliam would think of his granddaughters living this long. Well, I suppose he'd get a kick out of it. I know he'd have lived longer if Grandma hadn't died and broke his heart. Sometimes you need a reason to keep living. I'll tell you the truth. I wouldn't be here without Sister Sadie. We are companions. But I'll tell you something else. Sadie has taken on this business of getting old like it's a big project. She has it all figured out about diet and exercise. Sometimes I just don't want to do it, but she's my big sister, and I really don't want to disappoint her. Funny thing about Sadie is she rarely gets, what's the word? Depressed. She's an easygoing type of gal. Now, honey, I get the blues sometimes. It's a shock to me to be this old. Sometimes when I realize I'm 101 years old, it hits me right between the eyes, and I say, "Oh, Lord, how did this happen?" Turning 100 was the worst birthday of my life. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. Turning 101 was not so bad. Once you're past that century mark, it's not as shocking. There's a few things I have had to give up. I gave up driving a while back. I guess it was in my late 80s. That was terrible. Another thing I gave up on was cutting back my tree so we have a view of the New York City skyline to the south. Until I was 98 years old, I would climb up on the ladder and saw those tree branches off so we had a view. I could do it perfectly well, so why pay somebody to do it? Then Sadie talked some sense into me, and I gave up doing it. Some days I feel as old as Moses, and other days I feel like a young girl. I tell you what, I have only a little bit of arthritis in my pinky finger, and my eyes aren't bad, so I know I could still be practicing dentistry. Yes, I'm sure I could still do it. But it's hard being old, because you can't always do everything you want exactly as you want it done. When you get as old as we are, you have to struggle to hang on to your freedom, your independence. We have a lot of family and friends keeping an eye on us, but we try not to be dependent on any one person. We try to pay people, even relatives, for whatever they buy us, and for gasoline for their car, things like that, so we do not feel beholden to them. Longevity runs in the family. I'm sure that's part of why we're still here. As a matter of fact, until recently, there were still 5 of us of the original 10 children. Then Hubert went to glory on December 28th, 1990, and a few weeks later, in February 1991. That leaves me, Sadie, Laura, our baby sister who moved to California, with her husband. Now, when Hubert died, that really hurt. He was just shy of 90 years old. It never made a bit of difference to me that Hubert became Assistant United States Attorney and a judge and all that. He was still my little brother. Same way with Hap. You know what? Even when he was 95 years old, Sadie and I still spoiled him. When he didn't like what they were cooking for dinner at his house, he would get up and leave the table and come over here, and we'd fix him what he liked to eat. Good old Hap knew he was going to glory, and he was content. He said, I've had a good life. I've done everything I wanted to do. I think I've done right by people. We Delaney's can usually say that when our time comes. You know what I've been thinking lately? All those people who were mean to me in my life, all those Rebby boys, they have turned to dust. And this old gal is still here, along with Sister Sadie. We've outlived those old Rebby boys. That's one way to beat them. That's justice. They're turning in their graves while Sadie and me are getting the last word in this book. And honey, I surely do love getting the last word. I'm having my say. Giving my opinion. Lord, ain't it good to be an American? Truth is, I never thought I'd see the day when people would be interested in hearing what 2 old Negro women have to say. Life still surprises me. So maybe the last laugh's on me. I'll tell you a little secret. I'm starting to get optimistic. I'm thinking, maybe I'll get into heaven after all. Why, I've helped a lot of folks, even some white folks. I surely do have some redeeming qualities that must count for something. So I just might do it. I just might get into heaven. I may have to hang on to Sadie's heels, but I'll get there. Congratulations to you all. You finished another book this year. That makes 4 for junior high that you've read over the course of the last school year. I hope you really enjoyed having our say. It saddens me that Bessie didn't seem to understand that salvation comes through the grace of Christ and belief in Him. So I hope that all of you've heard it many times at school, and I'm just going to reiterate it. The Bible very specifically says if you believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, you will be saved. That's for everyone. So it is your belief in Him that He is the Christ, He is God. He was sent to take your place. He made a way for salvation for you. It is only your acceptance of that fact that stands between you and heaven. So please, if you haven't accepted Christ as your Savior yet, please do so. Let us know if you've made that decision. It's terribly important, and I wish somebody had made that very clear to Bessie and Sadie. The book is phenomenal. Their writing, their conversational tone is wonderful. But the message that they give us is so much better than just the style of writing. These are 2 people who lived through some of the darkest, most embarrassing times in American history, and they came out with a shining light of happiness to be American, and a desire to want to do right by everyone around them. So please take that into your mind and your heart as you do the homework on this last chapter of the book. And I will talk to you again tomorrow when we start the last chapter of our textbook. Have a really good day, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Goodbye.